Welcome to Vajra Body, Vajra Mind, a provocative podcast that explores the outer limits of spiritual practice and human development. On our show, we talk with leaders in the Buddhist, entheogenic, and somatic fields, and through these conversations, we attempt to glean the most pragmatic and succinct bits of wisdom that connect us deeper into our heart, body, and mind. Our show is dedicated to the evolution of the human species and the benefit of all beings.
Welcome, everybody. Today's special guest is Michaela Boehm, and we had an amazing discussion about a lot of topics, but really what we did is we covered the cutting edge of spirituality and its practice today, mainly focusing on somatic practice, mentorship, and leadership. So it's a fascinating conversation. We covered a wide range, and it's a little longer than most of our podcasts, and we still had so much to talk about, so I know we're going to have her on again. We didn't even really get into sexuality, which is her expertise, but we really laid the foundation of, like I said, the cutting edge of spirituality. So I think you'll find it to be very fascinating. We sure did. Today we have on a special guest, Michaela Boehm. And I found Michaela's work the way a lot of people did, initially through David Dada and his teachings on sexuality and sexuality as spiritual practice. And he really kind of forerunner of that line of thinking. And I know, Michaela, now you've really taken that on your own, in your own direction. And I'm curious, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your work since then and how the work has become your own and what you've done with it.
Yeah, I spent 13 years really enjoying a super creative and fruitful collaboration with David and co-teaching with him. Also hosted his seminars at my house. I live in Ojai and I have a little farm with a retreat center on it. So, it's been an amazing 13 years. And last October, November, my original teacher, who was a woman and who I studied with for close to 11 years, last year on and off, but very, very closely for 10 years, died and passed on the lineage of that particular work to me. Mm-hmm. So in all the explorations that I had done in those 13 years, and with the added, kind of challenge, which was amazing, the creative challenge of bringing in the original teachings that I had received in a more formal form, I decided that I was going to offer a much more expanded repertoire to what I'd done before. I've also been just teaching all the public events for the last 6 or 7 years, traveling to Europe, doing study groups, and really being on the ground with how things have changed. Because, of course, things like The Way of the Superior Man, which was a pioneering book and, still is considered probably the most important book in that domain, was written, I think, 15 years ago now. Mm-hmm. And things have really, really changed since then, right? Mm-hmm. The way women work in the world, the way men are perceived in the world, particularly in the last 4 or 5 years, has been dramatically altered. And what I'm offering this year and where it's going from here takes that into account in very specific ways, which we can talk about at some point.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know what has changed, if you can give some context of what the book set up and what you've noticed is different.
I think that, when we go all the way back to women's liberation, the whole movement was designed to allow women to become full in their range of what was being expressed both internally and externally. So I still remember from the early 80s when I was a high school student, assertiveness training and things of that nature, right? Yes. Where literally you remember that as well. Yes. Right? That was a big deal, assertiveness training. Now, interestingly, I never was exposed to any of these things because I actually went to a women's school all the way till I was 18 and had a woman teacher. But but in mainstream culture, the liberation of women was a liberation of the masculine, so to speak, masculine traits in a woman.
Yes.
Right.
And that, of course, came with huge growth in that domain. And because of the way life is set up and business is set up, that which we consider the masculine traits. And I've started not using that word so much anymore because it comes with such huge gender and cultural connotation.
Of
But the
course.
traits within each human being that are the organizing principle, right?
Yeah.
The principle of following through, having a plan, making things happen, asserting oneself, right? All of that. That is what most women became very good at.
Yes.
Right? In exchange, of course, what happened and what I already saw when I was starting to date, right, in my late teens, early 20s, was men who had somewhat lost their main reason for existence, to say it very, very, um, it was a big stroke because there's a lot more to it. But all the things that were supposedly the man's domain and how a man contributed to his family, to his woman, to society were suddenly in question.
Yes.
And um, but on a much more on a psychological aspect, I spent 22 years counseling, counseling people, couples, individuals, had a counseling practice. So people every hour on the hour, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. So, I've seen a lot of people over the years going through this where what was required on a psychological level was men developing sensitivity and feeling and a certain kind of vilifying of the aspects of men that made them useful, for many thousands of years, the hunting, the killing, that kind of stuff. So there was kind of a seesaw of first women's development, then men had to kind of catch up. Then there was, of course, Robert Bly and all the men's movement and all of the things that brought men more in touch with other aspects of themselves. And of course, also societal pressure till this day, where a certain softness and a certain acquiescence is required. And so the pendulum kind of swung very hard in the other direction. And when books, like Iron John and I mean, all of those things and The Way of the Superior Man came out, it was a time where it was really needed for men to get reacquainted and re-empowered with the aspects of them that they had to either suppress or lose, or also wanted to lose. Because, of course, it's also not that great when you constantly have to be the one kicking ass.
Yeah.
So it's not only that men were disempowered, men also happily gave up certain things, right? And rightly so. It's not that black and white. But so in the last 5 years, and in younger generations, these things are no longer that relevant. When you look at younger men, particularly, they are not plagued by the what is my purpose and how do I. It's much more fluid, and in the younger generations, particularly, you see men who are naturally sensitive. And you see women that are naturally assertive, and it's no longer a coat or a make believe or a shell, like was always assumed, right? That's kind of an almost unnatural behavior when it's become part of their being. And most women, to talk about women first, have the full range from super feminine to super masculine available, and they are able. I'm talking Western world, of course, right? We want to always say that because there's whole other realms of experience of being a woman that are still as horrendous as they've always been. But in Europe and the US particularly, women can do pretty much anything they want in large stretches of society, not in all. But so when a woman goes to work, she has the full range available now. And when a man goes to work, he has the full range available now. And the differences are not that defined anymore. And it's for the most part not a place of suffering or confusion anymore.
One of the things
What
that,
ha-
real
Mhm.
quick, that I
Yeah.
wanted to bring out that maybe I'm curious and I think has probably changed since the book came out. And it's a problem I ran into, and a problem I think a lot of men ran into, is like, on the one hand, we found the book that kind of guided us to purpose and everything, but then ambition and stress about that purpose again became a problem. Like, it became
Yes.
I must be more masculine, I must be more purposeful, and it created this inner tension. And I'm wondering if that's an aspect of what's changed since that book came
Yes.
out.
Well, that's particularly an aspect that's changed for me very dramatically in the last year and a half, in the way I teach, in the way I relate to men, in the kind of offerings I bring both to men and women, is the violence and the imposition that that kind of a thought model creates on the human nervous system and the body, right? And so having traveled and taught, for 13 years in that particular realm, I've seen my fair share of what, is called widely the data bot, right? The stiff, rigid, staring straight ahead, tight jaw, tight solar plexus, kind of a man who somehow tries to put his body into submission so he no longer ejaculates, and his woman's happy with him, and he takes all the abuse a woman can give him because he can breathe her in, and
And fuck her to God.
exactly, and fuck her to God, not considering the fact that most of that storm is old unresolved emotions that really belong to a psychologist and not a sexual yoga workshop, right, or sexual yoga occasion, and not taking into account that that amount of push and pressure and tension is completely counterintuitive and counteractive to the deep sourced conscious relaxation that can be achieved when you can actually relax, and when on some level you don't give a shit anymore if you please your woman/mother or
Yes.
not, right? Because that's the trap that a lot of people get into, right? If you want to be the kind of man who pleases his woman, you become the little boy, right? If you want to be the kind of man who does it right, you become this type A, tight, controlling, rigid dude. And of course, in the realms of sex, in the realm of consciousness and relationship, the depth of your relaxation, the emptiness, so to speak, of your inner existence is the key. So a lot of the men's practice, as it is done out there, and a lot of the women's practice in the reciprocal way, is done by putting a whole lot of imposition, a whole lot of pressure, and a whole lot of this is the way it should be, and only if you're like that are you good enough. Once again, right? It's like a whatever sexual athleticism or spiritual sexual athleticism, where you are now just gathering more things to do. And of course, anytime you, I don't know how to say that, anytime you have another project that keeps you from actually feeling something, right? You're just prolonging the misery. Now, now you're trying to learn how to bypass ejaculation, and then what's the next thing, and what's the next thing, and you're endlessly numbing to what's really happening underneath, which is the pain and the pleasure of existence as is,
Well, I'll
so
show you
to
where that's shown
speak.
up in my life is, the beginning of my relationship with my wife is that I was blown wide open and I was doing exactly what you were saying. I didn't really care about the results of the sex. And of course, that took us very deep. Um, and then the resistance started to come back. And now it's like, well, if we're not having God's sex or whatever, I don't want to have sex because I have this standard now that I'll just avoid sex altogether because I'm afraid of being subpar to that. And it was crazy how that
Exactly.
snuck back in.
Yes. Now you have to be a superior man in order to do anything, right?
Yeah.
But of course, we could also just consider that any sex is God's sex. How
Yes.
could it be anything else,
Right.
right?
Well, that's peeling away a bunch of
It's
layers of what's been taught away,
yeah,
and
yeah,
trauma, maybe.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
curious
and
a little bit
trauma.
how you teach this then. How do you teach that in a
Hmm.
softer way, or in a more
Hmm.
integrated
Hmm.
way, or a more allowing way?
Hmm. hmm Well, the first, now, mind you, I want to say that, of course, skills, learning skills, is an incredibly important piece of teaching. And one of the reasons why one should go and get taught, right, is learning skills. But you cannot confuse skill learning with spiritual development,
Hmm.
right? You cannot confuse uh, the present moment as it is with trying to bypass it for getting somewhere where it's better.
Hmm.
So skill development, um, I still teach as many or even more skills, but in the context of somatic learning, so
Hmm.
somatic experiencing of the body, the somatic information that can only be learned by the body exploring and owning its own um, explorations or its own findings. So a lot of the work that we're doing these days is based on exposing the body to exercises that require that you learn uh, deep relaxation and that you learn to be with sensations, both pleasant and unpleasant, um, and not bypass them, not numb them, not skip out of them, but be with them in a way that your body can stay relaxed and with it. And of course, like you said, a lot of people have lots of trauma, and particularly in the realm of sexuality and spirituality, I think there's a lot of people who come with massive trauma. And to just lay on some exercises, of course, reinvigorates their trauma patterns endlessly. Almost anyone who comes and says, I want to be pushed to my edge, I'm assuming that they had some traumatic stuff happening that they're trying to reinvigorate in some spiritually bypassed way, so to speak. Not always, but often. So step one for me these days is always dealing with the body, dealing with the layers of tension and contraction in the body, informing the body of and exposing the body to what's actually happening versus what you think is happening,
Hmm.
allowing the body to learn the lessons it needs to learn so it can stay in a deep squat, so to speak, emotionally, spiritually, and physically, while staying present without the suffering of around what's happening. And then from there uh, we can teach specific skills because, of course, if you would learn a skill of how to breathe with a woman, for instance, or how to feel somebody from a place of actually being able to feel yourself, you're going to be a lot more effective. And so the basis of what I'm doing these days is feeling as the ground for intimacy, sexuality, and development. Because just from a sexual standpoint, but not only, you cannot feel another human being unless you can feel yourself. Because all you're picking up, of course, is the echo of that person's body in your own as sensation.
Hmm.
And then there's things like mirror neurons where you can, of course, um, give somebody else an experience through the experience of your own body. You can relax someone through the relaxation of your own body.
Hmm.
But these things you can't armchair. As much as people try, you cannot armchair sexual engagement, physical engagement, intimate engagement. You have to actually be here with your body.
I have a question, and I don't know if you'd be able to generalize it, but what kind of common things do you find in a man and in a woman that they might be held up with? Is there some common trends, or tend to be pretty individualistic?
Held up with, as in contracted
Yeah,
around.
like physical body, maybe, like, for example, like locked pelvis or not permission to move in a certain way or breathing or something like that.
Yes, all of the above. But Um, a lot of times, as you know, common trauma patterns center around leaving the experiences of the body behind and
Hmm.
going to some other place. So
Hmm.
even if you weren't traumatized per se, most of us who've lived somewhat of a life and didn't grow up in the idyllic jungles of Fiji or something like that, right, have been exposed to a fair share of pretty intense stimuli that make it so that we don't actually want to feel our body that much. Also, of course, our modern world happens pretty much in your thumbs and in your head, right? Typing and thinking. So the areas that in generally speaking need to be enlivened and educated and awakened are the lower body, because that's not only where a lot of feeling happens, but of course that's also where sex happens, and that's where the engagement with power happens. Even in martial arts, right? They speak about the hara or dantian, uh, all meditations center around the navel point in a certain way. Sexually speaking, of course, the genitals. The most important thing, if you want to look at where those areas contracted, is feeling the pelvic floor, for instance, right? In most people, the pelvic floor is very pulled up because that's how we bring the energy up and keep ourselves from being too far to the ground, things of that nature. So definitely pelvic floor, pelvis, genitals, belly, the power centers in the belly, the solar plexus, push, right? That extreme push, that will comes through the solar plexus. So in most people, when you put your fingers, like on top of the solar plexus and start pushing down, there's an immediate sharp pushback from the diaphragm, solar plexus area. So those are usually the first areas to work with. Of course, then there's, the whole plane of the heart, so to speak, right? The whole horizontal plane of the heart, from the fingertips, to the palms, to the arms, to the shoulders, to the chest, to the actual heart area, both emotionally and physically. That can also be contracted, people's shoulders being slumped forward, protecting. So it's a multitude of things one can attend to, but in general, lower body is one of the first places I'd go to traditionally, because the downward flow of energy affects our capacity to feel and act and be a lot.
It's so amazing to me that our collective unconscious has figured this out. It's so many of the teachers that I respect, they're all going in the somatic direction. Also
Yes,
a
yes,
shamanic direction, I think, because it's this frontal body stuff and that's why it's like
exactly.
Eastern spirituality in a certain sense has been terrible for us because it's, more encouraging of the focus and the staring at the mind and the,
Yes,
self-inquiry and pressing all our energy into our head even more. And it comes from these people that, I think we're already more embodied than we are. And so
I
because
was gonna say that. Yes,
yeah, and so
yes,
it's like the wrong medicine all over the
yes,
place, and so
yes,
we need this totally different medicine, and
yeah.
I think that it's just we're finally catching on. It's taken like 50 years of Eastern spirituality getting over here, and now all the teachers are like Reggie Ray and yourself and Ken McLeod and all these people are like, oh, go to the body. That's where we all need to go,
Yes,
and it's been really
yes,
amazing.
yes, yes. Yeah, I mean, and of course, the same way, right? People interpret the things that they need for themselves because, like, for instance, the Tibetans have a word for the low center of in the body, right, where the energy should sit, which is lung,
Hmm.
right? And the lung should be where your hara is, so to speak, right? So when you look at people like, I mean, pretty much any Vajrayana Buddhist teacher that we would know in common, right? Tibetan,
Hmm.
they're incredibly embodied.
Yes.
They're really full and heavy in the lower body. And that's, of course, culturally speaking, when people don't sit I mean, nowadays, of course, this has all changed, but they are constantly on the floor, squatting, sitting, embodying in a certain way. But for Westerners and for, I think, humans as it goes right now, somatic learning and somatic experiencing is really the only way um, to go. I mean, of course, you don't have to, but I think that's the common consensus. And, because I spent so many years counseling people, like speaking with people, I can very strongly attest to um, the uselessness of that in a certain way.
Hmm.
That's not to say that my clients didn't get help and support, and I think it's very important to have cognitive stimulation and understanding and underpinning. But all the thinking and all the explaining and all the understanding of the psychological, mental aspects do not do anything for the actual body that needs to interact with another human being.
Well, I think it's interesting you said that too, because a couple episodes ago, Jed had me as the interviewee for the podcast, and he asked me what I had learned over the year, and I had a hard time articulating it, and it kind of came down to transmission. And I think that is what we're pinpointing, that the thing that's actually helping when we're listening to spiritual teachers and stuff isn't the words. It's the transmission. It's the bodily transmission. It's the, and I think that that's what's occurred in the podcast. And that's part of why we use the video for the interview. I mean, our audience doesn't necessarily know that, but when we do the interview, we always have the video because that transmission is almost more important than the words. And the words can only carry so much of that physical transmission. I think it carries some, but I think, you know, because it's like the spiritual path I've walked up till now, before I started getting in the body, did have some benefits, but I don't think it was the linguistic benefits I thought it was. I think it was this other kind of ineffable, subtle transmission that really mattered.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you. And, you know, transmission, I mean, that's a whole other subject, right? But you were saying earlier the shamanic aspects, right? Which I think are really where the cutting edge lies. You know, having been instructed in a ultimately very shamanic tradition, and also having grown up in Austria, where in the part of Austria where I grew up, it's very Celtic for many, many thousands of years. And a lot of the rituals and remedies center around what one could call shamanic traditions. I've always kind of had a sense of that being so very important. But then recently, I really got very involved and excited about epigenetics. I don't know if you know anything about epigenetics, right? And so one of the things that I've now realized for you know, I am by no means a scientist, so you know, don't make me responsible for the you know, for the explanation of epigenetics. But the fact that there's information outside the DNA attached to the DNA that gets passed down through the generations and that stores the traumas and emotional experiences of your DNA lineage makes a lot of sense, right? Like, for instance, when you look at things like alcoholism, which is considered hereditary in a certain way, but it can't be isolated on the DNA. But everyone can see that when you see your family cope a certain way with traumas, i.e. drinking, right, that's what you would go to. Now they know that a rat exposed to a certain stimulus 3 generations back will send that epigenetic information down to their ancestors, and they can be exposed to the stimulus and have the same horrible traumatic response to it. Right? So when you consider that most Westerners have been exposed to 1 or 2 world wars and several other genetic cleansings and all kinds of stuff, right? And that's just the last 100 years.
Yes.
That's not considering, you know, the insanity of violence and genocide and everything that every human being holds. Then it's an interesting thing to see. And so what I've been really looking into in the studies that have been done, and also, you know, in my own experience, is that when people look at what cleanses or reprograms these epigenetic informations on these methylene chains, it's shamanic rituals.
Wow.
Right? Of course, you know, the pharmaceuticals are trying to come up with medicine, but when you really look at it in the studies that have been done, a lot of these studies show that plant medicine, rattles, saging, ritual dance, repetitive motion, you know, all of those things actually clear that information. And of course, anybody who's ever worked with trauma, either as a trauma therapist or as a body worker, knows that in the animal kingdom, for instance, trauma gets shaken out of the body. Right? If you watch National Geographics, you see like a antelope being chased by a lion and it gets away. When it got away, it will stand there and just shiver, 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 shiver. And then there comes a moment where it shakes itself and just walks off as nothing ever happened.
I'm reading
And
Peter Levine
humans
right
don't-
now. with the
What
somatic.
did you say?
I'm reading Peter Levine right now on somatic
Levine,
experiencing.
right? Who I'm a big fan of, because he really, very precisely boiled these things down. And the freeze response, which is, in addition to the fight or flight response, is something he put on the map in the States, big time. And those things, as they get stored in the body, can only be removed through the body, so to speak, and through shamanic ritual and aspects of that kind, which of course are all realms of experience that we're missing these days.
I'm wondering if you have something our listeners could use even now in their own private practice without going to a workshop or without seeing a shaman. Is there a way to access any of this trauma or get into the bodily experience on their own?
Yeah, I mean, of course, the unpopular advice here is movement, right? And the more movement, the better. Human bodies are, of course, built to move for long periods of time a day, which none of us do. But any movement will have an effect. Particularly, I've developed a whole body of work completely independent of any of the stuff that I've done in the last 15, 18 years. Um, that's a movement, a movement practice essentially that deals with these kind of things, and it's non-linear in its application. So any non-linear practice, without needing to know the formal practice that is involved with that, any non-linear practice, meaning nothing that's linear. So regular exercise is usually quite linear. Yoga is quite linear, the way it's mostly taught. So I would say things like dancing, even if it's just one song a day, or if you're a man, you don't feel like dancing, some kind of martial arts move, some kind of ducking
Qigong.
and weaving and jumping, qigong,
Yes.
round. Even though qigong is still, it definitely is in that realm, but qigong it might be still a bit too controlled, right? Even if
Form.
somebody just shakes like a mad person for a moment, right? Bouncing is one of my favorite go-to remedies for anyone I work with and teach, is just bouncing, standing with the feet hip width apart and bending the knees, and then pushing them back, like bending and straightening the knees, not violently, please, but just bouncing the body up and down, and bouncing the tension down through the body. So literally imagining that the brain bounces, the face bounces, the jaw bounces, and sticking the tongue out, relaxing the shoulders as they bounce, the solar plexus, the belly, the pelvic area, feeling like the bottom of the body, like the perineum, pelvic area, bounce up and down, is incredibly beneficial and useful.
I also notice you're sitting on the floor, are you not?
Yeah.
And something about being closer to the ground seems to make sense too. Is that on
Yeah.
purpose, or you're sitting on the ground right
Yeah.
now?
I mean, whenever I don't have to actually attend to, things like computer work where you have to sit on an ergonomically good chair and deal with things on a table, I sit mostly on the ground and quite enjoy that. And there is something about that, not only because your growth to the grow slow, not slow, close to the earth, but also it opens your hips. I squat a lot, so I sit, the way women sit in like Asian countries, where you just, with your butt close to the floor, but without touching it. That's also really good for the spine, but it actually does open that whole lower body. I'm super lucky because, as I said in the beginning, I have this little farm in Ojai, and it's got vegetable gardens and orchards, and my studio is built right into the ground. It's very rocky here, so it's like really sunken in between the rocks. And so I get a lot of with nature, on the ground, earth contact still, which a lot of people don't actually get.
You
If you
know,
live in New York City, you work in a high rise, you live in a high rise, you don't have that luxury anymore.
very nice. Now, I wanted to ask something new I'm starting to do with guests is guests do a wonderful job of bringing up stories and the kind of a map of what their work is and philosophy. But I'm kind of curious of where you're at now as far as personally, and you're doing a lot of sexual and body work, and what kind of discoveries are you having, or what are you curious about? Like, what's your spiritual question, if you will, or embodiment question?
Mm. Mm. There's a million,
I'm
as
sure.
always. I think one of the marks of I definitely think one of the marks of a good teacher, but in general, I think also the marks of a good practitioner is that you keep your interests very wide, and that there's always a new inquiry, and that it's not so specific just to your own field, right? But that there's other aspects that are constantly involved, and there's no congealing around one kind of strategy or even teaching. And so even though I had long-term relationships with traditions, I think for me, what's very important is to constantly have new influences. So for the last year and a half or so, I've had a new co-teacher who I travel with, who is a man from Europe, who brings in a whole other realm of expertise to my expertise, amongst them Qigong. I saw that in your bio, a very rigorous, very long standing meditation practice. He started when he was 5, martial arts. So he had kind of a Zen influenced instruction since he was 5, martial arts since he was 5. And who was also into survival and trained as a yoga teacher in a very specific, very somatically um, interesting and precise tradition. So, with the influence of teaching with somebody who has a completely different background, but the same alignment and the same principles very strongly, and he, as a matter of fact, has kind of refined my own insight through uh, different influences. I've really come to feel again how important it is to constantly do new things. I'm 48 now, so it's a little bit like you get set in certain ways, and as a teacher, certainly, um, it can get pretty tempting to just phone it in or do the same thing or bring tried and true exercises. So my particular challenge, particularly this year now, but it already started last year, is to constantly recreate the exercises, constantly bring my own practice as it develops into the exercises, and keep it completely fresh, for the sake of what you would call transmission, right? My body informing the exercises, my experience informing the exercises. So one of the I'll just give you one. This is a tiny little piece of my personal exploration, but one of the things that I've explored completely out of character for me, being Austrian and having grown up in a pretty icy cold climate, I've taken a course that taught me how to submerge in ice cold water while keeping my metabolism and my circular system up, right? So there's like it's this kind of a tumo breathing and meditation. There's a man in, I don't know if you've heard of Wim Hof.
No.
Um,
I have, yeah.
Oh, you must look into him. He's
Mm.
fantastic. So there's a guy named Wim Hof who teaches this in a very organized way, and so I've put myself through that curriculum, and it's a very fun thing. We go and we dip in the snow water runoff, and
Woo.
do the breathing techniques and stuff like that. And it's just one little thing, but like having gone somewhere where I never thought I wanted to go or could go,
Mhm.
not get hypothermic and learn what it takes to create that kind of control over your circulatory system and your immune system and things like that, was hugely informative on my work, because it's added a dimension of what I want to and can teach in physical practices,
Mhm.
right? Um, and what it takes and the kind of relaxation. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is just the last 2 days, last weekend, I taught for the first time some of the teachings that my first teacher gave me, which all centered around the sacred in the profane, so to speak, meaning doing ordinary tasks with great devotion, which is really where my heart lives, and with my animals, with my land, with my cooking, with my art, and things like that. And so last weekend, I taught uh, a women's class on and in my own kitchen with with recipes that had been passed down to me, where we had 16 women, which is sadly all I could fit in my kitchen. Um, Actually work with food and spices and flower arranging and table setting and eating and poetry and dance and movement, in the realms of embodiment and sacred ritual, without going too fluffy with it, right? Without going too much into the goddessy realm. And the weekend before, we did the same for the men with just somatic movement, right? The deep relaxation and the somatic learning amongst men.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just kind of a revelation as to how much can be done when you widen your horizons and when you create things fresh, again and again and again and again. So that's kind of what I'm really passionate about. It is the constant rebirth of certain things.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really great. And I think that just pushing yourself to do anything you don't want to do on a regular basis is so vital, because we have that tendency to just get into our comfort zone and then stay there. And then new discoveries come along and no learning happens. And then depression and boredom always inevitably follow. And it's what
Yeah,
doesn't even matter so much what you do. It's like, I know that there's even a health trend of ice baths, like Tim Ferriss and Dave Asprey suggest, getting in an ice bath with 3 bags of ice from the convenience store, and you just jump in
right,
for its health benefits. But you could also just see it as a challenge, because almost nobody wants to do that. Sounds horrible.
right.
But just pushing your
Yeah, I
edge by
think
doing that.
exactly, but pushing your edge not in a violating
Yes.
yourself way, but in finding that place where you have actual interest and then following that place where you have actual propensity and going a little bit further than you would naturally go, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's also things when you do them, when you push your edge too much, it will shut you
Trauma.
down,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So yeah, exactly, trauma or just snapback. But yeah, I think Tim Ferriss's ice bath things comes from the Wim Hof
Oh,
thing. But
does
the
it?
Wim Hof thing is actually training. It's meditation and breathing. That it's like a tummo meditation, Tibetan. All the
Yeah.
yogis who could sit on the Himalayas with a loincloth.
Dry out a wet
That's
sheet.
that
Yeah.
exactly that's control of the inner circuits of your body. If you take an ice bath, it's really good for your health. It's amazing, right? But if you learn how to actually um, deal with the inner circuitry, then that benefit goes beyond, what you can imagine. And like you said, also the confidence and the expansion of having gone somewhere where you don't want to go is just I mean, that's an empowerment.
Yes. Very much.
That's an actual empowerment. And so, it's a fine line, because a lot of self-help or personal development is essentially based on disempowerment, right?
Yeah.
It's telling people they're not good enough till they do what is prescribed, selling them what is prescribed, and then always stringing them along to go, well, but you're still not good enough. You're still not good enough. While a whole other way of going at it, and there's, lots of people who do it that way, is you give people enough tools and topics, and you expose them to things so that they can explore something that empowers them, regardless if they go to a workshop or not, right? Because you should go to a workshop for skill development, not because you think that if you've finished doing that workshop, you'll finally be good enough or lovable or approved.
Yeah, definitely. That's been an ongoing theme of our show is an interest in mentoring and creating mentors, because
Yes,
there's a lot of teachers the student's always a student and the teacher's always the teacher, and that never changes, and that
right.
just leads to constant disempowerment.
Yeah. Well, that's right. And not only constant disempowerment, but also, you know, when the teacher then goes, or when the teacher no longer wants to do that thing, then that whole um, body of work gets lost,
Yeah.
right? You have to be able to withstand that feeling that, you have superior knowledge and nobody else can get it, and instead um, give it to people and mentor people and work with people. And it's not easy. I've decided this year will be the year where I'm going to offer a teacher training, which I've never considered, because it requires, that's another edge when we talk about where is it going. It requires that you essentially give up control over your material,
Yep.
right? You give it to people, and then God knows what they'll do with it. And
That's
as you
right.
see,
That's
like
right.
when we look at, like, I think you were mentioning a few people earlier, that you've interviewed, when you look at those people's lineages, right, there is a certain kind of surrender and having to give it away and let it go happening, because it doesn't always turn out the way you want it to. And, the appointing of a successor, I think, is a very dicey business in this day and age,
Yeah.
particularly in the West, because there's so many other factors. So the giving away and the relinquishing the control and the teaching and mentoring and allowing each person to infuse that teaching, with their own um, trauma and genius imprint, is a very hard thing to wrap your mind around, right? Yeah, because we as humans, we're not always the nicest. you know?
But I think it's so important when that kind of empowering is going on, especially, I see like Reggie Ray and Ken McLeod, both I know have named several teachers, not just one,
Mhm.
given permission to teach under their lineage. And
Yes,
because that's happening, and yeah, all of the student teachers that I know are teaching quite differently from their teacher. But I think that's
right.
so positive, because then the teaching can evolve. And it's like we've spent so much. The lineage has always been in the past about preservation, and
Yes,
that is an automatic conflict, because you're trying to protect this quote unquote lineage that's like supposed to have some kind of autonomy that could be protected, first of all, which I don't think it does, and then try to keep it perfect through time without it being changed by the circumstances or cultures or people that it runs into. And then we
yeah,
see that problem with the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, because there's the Tibetan lineage is trying to preserve, rightfully so, the cultural and Tibetan heritage, but on the one hand, but on the other hand, then it runs into Westerners who need somatic help, not mental help, as we talked about, and it doesn't know what to do because it can't
yeah,
adapt to the
yeah,
needs of the practitioners.
yeah, yeah. And then I've had a lot of conversations recently, because there's whole schools of tantra, and I'm making here a big quotation mark, since um, it can't be seen in the podcast, but there's whole schools that claim, the crazy wisdom lineages, and not only in the Trumpa traditions, but in Tantra traditions, and a lot of times crazy wisdom is just a euphemism for batshit crazy,
Yes.
because and people's sexual contractions and perversions turned into teachings, and on the other hand, in quite a few traditions, including some of the Tibetan traditions, it is considered that whoever takes over does own it completely, has enough practices and has metabolized it enough so it becomes their own. Like, for instance, in the lineage that I was originally trained in, it's woman to woman, and it looks very different in each generation, because it's the principle and not the dogma that gets transmitted, so to speak. So And that's how it should be, right? If you are, let's say, teaching a meditation tradition, but you're paralyzed or you had a car accident, right? Well, Chogyam Trungpa is a perfect example, right? You can no longer sit in meditation posture. Well, how, you know, are you disqualified from being a lineage holder? If you realize that your propensities, when put into the right kind of container, transmit to people, shouldn't you do that within a lineage? And I think nowadays, I didn't always think like that. The answer is yes. And the other thing that I've realized very recently in the course of, coming out on my own and going out on my own is that one of the big lessons that I'm learning is you can't essentially keep people from their karma, destiny, or dysfunction, however you want to say that. It's all one thing in a certain way. You might see what would be the best for people, but if they don't want that, there's nothing you can do. And with all the love and all the goodwill and all the right kind of intention, it will still be a fucked up situation because it wasn't what the being wanted, right? Yeah. It's what maybe the being needed, but that is not what the being wanted. And so appointing people to teach or giving teachings has to be, as far as I'm concerned, right, held very lightly, because you can't actually make people do it the way you want it, because that would mean that they wouldn't have a personality anymore. Mm-hmm. Now, granted, right, in some traditions, you're not supposed to take over unless you've reached enlightenment, and hence you're somewhat, your personality is not running the show anymore. But how often does that happen?
Yeah.
Right, not that often. And of course, if you were born in a remote village in Tibet or India, and you are taught from when you're 5 years on and put through incredibly hard and harsh paces, there's a high chance that maybe you do give it up at some point, right?
Yeah.
Because just through sheer circumstance. But for most Westerners, I think if you wait for somebody to get enlightened to pass on your information, you're going to wait a long time.
That's definitely true. Well, I think that hesitancy that's the main tipping point, is that we need to recognize that mentoring doesn't mean being perfect, or being a teacher doesn't mean being perfect. It means that you hold a certain skill set that you're proficient at, and we need to recognize what that does mean and what that doesn't mean. It doesn't mean they're perfect in every aspect of their life. They're not necessarily a PhD in chemistry just because they're good at meditation. That we understand what it is they do offer and what it is they don't offer, and allow that more frequently, because we use our own intelligence to discriminate what that person can teach and what they can't.
Yeah.
And I'll even add to that is that, my teachers that have been giving me the most help, for the ones who've given me permission just to be who I am at this moment, especially some of my male teachers who have really helped me not have to be so rigid in what it is to express myself as a human being, as a male human being. And they're flawed as all get out. And the reason that I can trust that is because they're coming and saying, hey, this is, I'm showing you all aspects of myself, and I may stumble, and I realize that I may not be transmitting this information in the most shiny way or whatever, but it's perfect because it's human, and we're in these human bodies, and that's what's been most helpful for me.
I think that's very, very true and I agree, right? But I think there's that the big caveat here, the big deciding factor in what you're saying is your teachers were disclosed with their weaknesses.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the important thing, right? If you can trust somebody to show it to you, warts and all,
yes,
right, then you can actually make a choice. The thing that I struggle with personally and still have a fair share of judgment on, which you'll hear about in a second, is people who present themselves as something that they're clearly not.
Right,
and
right.
It's not a moral thing, as in, oh, somebody who says they're this shouldn't have sex with students, even though that's very questionable, right? But when somebody goes, hey, the way I'm built, this is how I do my thing, and then I can go, well, I don't want to be instructed by that or not. But I know several people who are quite prominent out there teaching, talking about feeling and, teaching things so that people feel more, and coming down on people for not feeling enough and bypassing their feelings. And in their private time, they're binge drinkers or alcoholics, or, use way more drugs than is good for anyone. To numb themselves from actually feeling stuff, right, in their body and in their psyche. And I know people who pretend that they're, celibate when they're clearly not. That's questionable to me, not from a moral standpoint, but solely from a standpoint of the consent that people give to be taught by somebody who's actually not doing the thing that they're teaching.
Well, and that's why I think that the students have such a big responsibility to check out a teacher. And if a teacher's like not available, like, they're hiding parts of their lives, which, which I think is fortunately, many teachers are moving away from that, where they're like come out on stage and they're this person, and then they leave, and then they have this whole other life. I think that we're starting to get more human teachers, and that's what I think, like you're saying, has to happen.
Yeah, and I mean, there is such thing as too much information, mind you.
Yes, yes, there's still privacy in the world.
But there is and I mean, I'm one for, I like my privacy a lot, right? And I certainly have areas that I don't want to have exposed to the general public. For instance, particularly my marriage is not up for discussion simply because it involves another human being. And, what I want to disclose is my thing. But if I started disclosing things that are influencing my husband's life in positive or negative ways, I've moved away from that quite substantially, not because there's something to hide, but because, he has a right for our relationship to be private. I will disclose things about myself, much more than I would disclose about my parents or my husband. So there's a fine line between how much do you want to share. I have Facebook friends, since these days most things happen via Facebook, who disclose everything, and it's like, really, dude? Do we really hear about what you ate yesterday and how it came out of you this morning, right? As some spiritual teaching, I don't think so. But would I want to know that somebody who teaches relationship work has an intimate partner or not? Absolutely, right? Or would I want to know that somebody who teaches meditation actually meditates on a regular basis? Or, like, for instance, one of the things that happened to me is I had a knee injury about now almost 6 years ago, and I was completely incapacitated. I couldn't do I could barely walk. So I had to stop teaching yoga, even though I'm a trained yoga teacher. I had to stop teaching yoga in my events and David's events because, I wasn't doing yoga. So I developed all other kinds of movement practices based on my own disability that very deeply influenced the way I'm teaching now, because I had to learn how to deal with a real problem, right? And I had to learn not only to learn how to deal with injury, but the imperfection of that, and the aging, and the decay of the body. And it's definitely done a lot of good for me. But till this day, I don't teach yoga. My co-teacher does, because he actively teaches yoga and practices yoga. I still don't do yoga on a regular basis, so I'm just not teaching it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today, Michaela. This was a vast conversation, and I think we really covered a lot. And I
have so many more questions too.
I know, me too. I really honestly wish we could go longer, because I've been really enjoying this. It was a very stimulating conversation. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and we can definitely have you back on. We can schedule that out, and I think we can hit a lot more
Yeah, well,
topics.
let's schedule something where we talk actually about sex. How about that?
That sounds good. Yeah, we didn't really get there, did we? But
No,
we
but I
covered a
think
wide
that
range.
that's a secondary conversation, right? I think the attitude and the uh, the the, the devotional aspect of what life's like is the underpinning. But yeah, it would be fun if we could go to some other domain as well.
Definitely, definitely. Well, and I think we talked a lot about things that don't get talked about, which is, I think, going to be really helpful to our listeners. So thank you.
Well, I mean, maybe just toss this out there. Maybe there's a way that you can send off or sign off in a way, giving a message to our listeners, perhaps in that realm of leading them in the right direction, or just some type of thing to leave them with.
Well, when we talk about the sexual domains and the domains of intimacy, there is nothing but practice, right? And
Absolutely.
and so I would definitely invite everyone to attend workshops, not only my own, but in general, do things for embodiment, do things that engage the body so you can become intimate with sensation and then with another human being. Move and if they can't go to a workshop, movement is the first domain to go into.
Wonderful.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
would you please direct everybody to where they can find you?
Yes. So I'm assuming you will post my name. So it's my full name, Michaela Boehm, which is spelled Boehm. So michaelaboehm.com. And next things coming up is I'm going to Europe in March, teaching in London and in Amsterdam. Also, for anyone who is really interested in immersing, my mentorship programs, my official mentorship program is designed as a 6 or 9 month study group. And they are both run in Europe. In Europe, it's a 9 months, and in the US, it's a 6 months, where people meet in Europe 4 times in 9 months, in the US 5 times in 6 months. And so that's a way to really immerse lots of homework, lots of practices, lots of individual attention and mentorship. And I also offer apprenticeships, but that's by application only and an individual thing. And then there's a whole lot of events coming up. My favorite thing to teach is 5 day intensives where it's men and women, and we go into the whole realm, everything from what we've just spoken about to actual, yogic sexual practices, relational things, shamanic explorations. 5 days is a long time to drop in a small group. Doing one in the US, one in Europe, and one in Australia this year.
Wonderful.
So, yeah. And there's lots more. I have a super busy schedule this year.
Yes. Well, that's great. Well, thank you again so
Thank you
much.
very much. And that was great.
Yes, it was. We'll have you on again, I promise. All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a
See
great
ya.
day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Michaela's awesome, isn't she? That was a great conversation. I hope you visit her website at michaelaboehm.com to learn more about her and maybe attend one of her workshops. And then as for us, you can visit us at vajrabodivajramind.com or visit us on Facebook to see what were current events. And if you like our podcast, please go ahead and post it on your wall or share it with other people that you think might like it. And of course, there's iTunes that you can give us a rating and a review that help us out quite a bit, or give us a thumbs up or a like on any of the other podcast applications that you use. All right, that's it for now. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.